Today we're going to be looking at exceptions in Python, and these are basically errors. We'll look at making and creating custom errors today, and then next time we'll have a look at resolving those errors so that you don't crash your program whenever something goes wrong. So as you can see in Python, there are a lot of errors. So you start with the base exception, which is the base class, and then you see you've got all these subclasses. And these pluses kind of show that they're child classes of each other. So a broken pipe error is a subclass of a connection error, which is a subclass of an OS error, which is a subclass of an exception, which is a subclass of the base exception. And then you've also got warnings, which also cause errors, but the difference is they're warnings rather than errors. So before we look at errors, there's this diagram that we need to understand. The first is that you've got a standard input, and this is usually your keyboard, where you type stuff into the standard input when you take an input in your program. And your program takes that in, processes stuff, and then it's got a standard output and a standard error. And the standard output is for outputting any information or logging information, and the standard error is for displaying error messages. And while there isn't much difference between the standard error and the standard output, you do need to know they both exist. Something else we've got in Python is exit and quit. So you can exit with 0 or 1, and generally this is used because 0 means there's no error and 1 then means there was an error. And then you can quit with message or a code. Quit and exit are virtually the same thing. The only real difference is the name, and they're both instances of the quitter class. Another way to show errors is to use logging. So you need to import logging, and then you can have debug messages, info messages, warning messages, error messages, and critical messages. And these are all different levels. So if you want to set the level, then you use the basic config. And the idea is that, let's say you set your basic config level to warning, then it will display warning messages, error messages, and critical messages, but it doesn't show information messages or debug messages. And then finally you've got raise. So raise is if you want to generate an error. So you just raise the exception, so this is a class name, and then with some message if you want to do that. So let's have a play with some of this. So we're going to start by importing logging. And we'll start by printing some log statements. So we'll say logging.debug. This is a debug message. And then we'll change each of those to info, warning, error, critical. And then change them so this is an info message, this is a warning message, this is an error message, and this is a critical message. And then we'll run that. And you can see that it said warning, error, and critical. So it hasn't shown any of the info or any of the debug. So we'll change it so that the logging.basic config, and we'll set the level equal to logging.debug. And so now we'll run it again, and you can see we've got all the messages this time. So now let's try something different. So this actually has a number. So if we kind of ironically display logging.debug, we can see that it's got a value of 10, and info's got a value of 20, warning 30, error 40, critical 50. So instead, maybe we should get an input to set the logging level to. So we'll say that the level is equal to an input. What level should we log? And then just put it on a new line. We also want to convert that into an integer. but the logging level has to be between 0 and 60. So we'll say if the level is less than 0, we want to raise a value error, and we'll say level is too low. Otherwise, if it's greater than 60, we also want to raise a value error, and this one will be level is too high. And then we want to actually set the level to that level. So let's say that we want to log level 15. So we've got the info messages, the warning messages, the error messages, and the critical messages. But let's say instead we want a level of 70. Well, it says we've got a value error, the level is too high. But a value error is a bit vague, so maybe we should define our own error that we can use. So here I'll define a class. This will be an out of bounds error, and it will extend value error. And then there's nothing to write here, so I'll just put pass to stop our program crashing. And so here, if it's too low, we'll raise an out of bounds error, saying the level is too low. And if it's too high, we'll also raise an out of bounds error, but this time saying it's too high. And so now you can see, let's say we type in -8. It says we've got an out of bounds error saying the level is too low. But maybe, and at the end, let's say we want to exit 0, and then we'll put a critical message saying something has gone wrong. Because if we try exiting the program and then it prints this, then something's obviously gone wrong. And so we'll log maybe level 25, and so we've got the warning, the error, the critical, and then it's just exited. But maybe instead we want to quit instead of exiting. Well, we could run it again. Maybe this time we'll use level 40, so only get the error and critical messages. And we can see that it's quit. And you can see there's no real difference because they're both members of the quitter class. So now we've managed to define our own exceptions. We've managed to raise errors, use logging as a module, exit and quit, which are pretty much the same thing. They just have different names. And so hopefully you've learned a lot about errors and exceptions in Python. And if you've enjoyed this video, see you again, same time next week. Till then.